Hi everyone, it's Niamh here and welcome to my art journaling channel. Today we're doing a celebration of International Women's Day, and this is a YouTube collaboration with the Live Art Journaling and Self-Development group. So I'm really pleased that Lucy and Jolene invited me to come along and share some of my art to celebrate this special day. So in the link in the box below, you'll find a link to the Facebook group. And within the Facebook group, you will find a whole heap of videos to celebrate International Women's Day, lots of art journaling pages and process videos that you can go and enjoy and use to boost your inspiration. So on with the process. I really enjoy art journaling. That's my passion, particularly in mixed media. And this is a technique that I've been using a lot recently to create backgrounds in my art journal page, and it's a way I create backgrounds when I'm not sure what direction I'm going. However, in this case, because it was in celebration of International Women's Day, I did actually have a little bit of a plan of what I wanted to do. More particularly, I had a quote in mind that I wanted to represent, which is strong women, may we know them, may we raise them, may we be them. So that's sort of what I had bouncing around the back of my head, but I didn't have a color scheme for it. So as you can see, it's a mixture of everything, all my favorite colors. So the reason that this background is working the way it does is I'm using acrylic paints to create layers. And you'll notice as I put a layer on, I dry it with my heat tool. If you're really patient, you can leave it to dry overnight. I'm not really patient, so I use my heat tool a lot. Just remember that acrylic paint is a type of plastic, so you know, be aware of that. Work in a well ventilated area. One thing you can do though, if you don't heat set it, is this technique which is called ghosting. So you just put down a stencil and you use damp wet wipe or a paper towel and wipe away the wet paint, and you end up with the sort of reverse stencil, which gives you a really cool background. I really loved how this was. Being me, I had to continue to add to it, but I probably would have been just as happy to leave it as is. So once I'd done all my paint and the colour in the background, I like to add some extra details in, and that's for me usually mark making. And in some cases it's actually mark making myself with some Posca paint pens, but in this case it was using some stamps. So the large stamp you can see there is from Darkroom Door, just some simple crosses, and I'm stamping using archival ink. In colours, so it sort of blends into the background, but if you look at it, you can see it. The other thing I love to use in my mark making is stuff I find around my house. So obviously bubble wrap is a big one, and just ink it up and use it as a big stamp, press it out, and you can get some really cool results. The reason I like using the archival ink is because it is permanent, but it's also an oil-based ink. So on the matte acrylic paint, it actually dries and it leaves a bit of a shine, so you get this just extra element of you know, surprise. When you look closely at the page or turn it in the light, you can sort of get these glints of different colors in it, which gives it again a really cool effect. So I am going through and drying it. As it said, it is permanent, but if you do stuff on it straight away, it can smear, so you do need to leave it for a minute or two to dry it, or hit it with your heat tool. The next layer I'm adding is some collage tissue papers and some rice papers. So these are really fun to use in your artwork because they just add an extra element of interest to your page, but because they are on tissue papers or very fine papers, once you adhere them down, it sort of melts into the background and you're just left with the mark making. So I'm using some gel, matte gel medium. I've put a little bit underneath, put my tissue paper down, and with what's remaining on my brush, I'm then spreading it out over the top to get that translucent effect. It looks like you're using a lot of gel medium. In actual fact, you're really not, and it's something when I've taught classes, I've noticed that people use a lot more than they actually need to. So while it does look generous, it really isn't, and you use a lot of what's already on your brush as you're spreading it out. Basically, if it's not going translucent, you need a little bit more. If it is going translucent, you've got plenty, and you do need to put some below and above to get a really good seal on your page and to make it sort of translucent. So again, once I finish this, I'm going back in and heat setting it. Now with the order that I did this, you can sort of mix and match. You could put the collage down first and then put the acrylic paints over the top, or you can do vice versa. It really doesn't matter. It's just getting some interest onto the page. So because I had the quote in mind, I decided I wanted to do a redactive painting, which means I'm using masks, and the masks I'm using I've cut out of magazines, and I cut out 3 strong female figures from a magazine, and it really was just happenstance that the middle one was lower, because that's the "we raise them" part of the quote, so it's more like a child. But choose a figure or figures that have, you know, a powerful pose. One of the things I did get caught out on is, particularly with the clothing you have, make sure when you actually do this mask around it that it still looks like a human when you don't have any of the other features in it. So the middle figure that I had there, I had a jacket sort of going out to the side, which I actually had to trim off because it made her look like a blob without the definition of the different features. I'm using Payne's Grey Black, Payne's Grey, not black at all, to mask off the background. And the reason I use Payne's Grey is it's not as opaque as a black. So I can still see those colours and the tissue papers and so on in the background. It means you've spent all that time doing that beautiful background that, you know, you're covering it up, and some people get really antsy about that, but you can still see it, and if you look closely at the page you can sort of still see what's happening. The next 2 things I should have done beforehand. So I'm adding some neon paints to my piece, and I really should have done this before I did the masking, but as you can see, it helps out. Neon paints are translucent by nature, so what they do is actually just really boost the color. It's like putting a filter over your artwork. The other thing I wanted to do was the original stencil I used with all those words. When I got to the end of this process, I actually really wish I'd stenciled those words over the top in white across the black, because I think those words sort of played in with that really strong, powerful women quote. Unfortunately, I didn't, and by the time I sort of got round to thinking about doing that, it was a little bit too late. So if you did want to sort of stencil something in the background, now would be the time to do it. So I've just taken a fine white Posca paint pen, and I'm just really sketchily drawing around the figures. My Posca paint pen isn't working all that well. It's been used to death, so I did have to sort of keep priming it, and it was flooding out a little bit. But I am sort of going over and making sure there's more than one line, because I want a really sketchy look to it. And you can see by just putting the white around it, it sort of just outlines this figure, or the figures that you have, and gives them a little bit more definition. We want them to be sort of abstract. You don't want them to be, you know, so readable as female figures, but you want them to be recognizable. One of the great things about using Posca paint pens is that they are acrylic paint, and as I explained before, acrylic paint is permanent when it's dry, but when it's not, you can still remove it with a wet wipe. So I could rub that out with a wet wipe because I didn't get my spacing right on my words. So then I decided to use white Stabilo All Pencil, which is a water-soluble pencil, just to give me an idea of where I wanted everything to go and how to fit it in. The great thing about using water-soluble pencils is that when you're finished, you can wipe them away and you don't have any trace of where they were. When I use grey lead pencils, I find that even they indent the page, so I always struggle with them. So I tend to do all my sketching out with a water-soluble pencil. So I'm just going over the top with my Posca paint pen. And once I've drawn out the letter, I then go back and sort of thicken up some of the edges to make it just look a little bit more interesting. You can go over as many times as you want to make it as opaque as you want. And of course, if you didn't have a paint pen, you can do this with acrylic paint and just paint it on as well. I'm just not very good when it comes to working with fine paint brushes, so I prefer to use a pen. So once I've gone in and done my quote, I'm just drying it off. So again, to make it permanent. Then I'm going in with some height washi, and I tend to, on all my abstract figures, put a little heart in. I don't know why I do it, I just really enjoy doing it. And if you look at my artwork, most of my abstract figures have a little heart on them. I suppose it makes them more human, I don't know. So now I'm going in with the rest of the quote with may we know them, may we raise them, may we be them. And this is one of my favourite styles of writing at the moment in my journal, is to really elongate the letters and make them quite skinny. It just really appeals to me, and it's a great way of spreading out your quote but making it really neat as well. I have a love of typography. I would love to be able to brush letter beautifully. I haven't quite got there yet, so this is my best tips for lettering, so to speak. One of the things I do always do with my lettering though is I put either a shadow or a highlight on them. In this case, because it's already on the Payne's grey in the background, I'm actually putting the highlight slightly within the white, so it's about a millimetre within the white, but it just helps to sort of pop it out and define the letters a little bit more. And you can see on the quote below, again, I'm just doing the same thing, putting the highlights on, and it starts to pop them out of the background. Just makes them look more readable as text on the page. I find my rule of thumb for doing shadows and highlights is to always go on the bottom left hand side of all the letters. It really doesn't matter where you go. You can go on the top right, wherever you like, as long as you're consistent. So I know that my pattern is to do the bottom left, so I know that all my letters are going to be consistent. And it's just a really helpful thing for me. So now you can see me just going in with the wet wipe and wiping away the Stipple or pencil that was in the background, just really gently. If you do scrub too much, you might find some things coming off, but it should be right. So this time I was thinking, I wish I'd stenciled in the background. So I decided to do the next best thing. I'm using really scribbly handwriting. Those people who follow Dina Wakely have been to her classes. It's called, I keep going to call it asymmetric, asemic writing, which is illegible writing or scribbles that look like text. I know what all that says, so I was writing about the strong women I know. I was writing about my daughters and how I'm raising them. I was writing about how I felt I was strong. But it's not stuff that I wanted to share with the world, and it's probably not something I want to go back and read myself, but being able to write it down as I went was really powerful. So here's a close-up of the final pages. It's a really simple technique, this reductive painting using masks, and you can use any figures you like. You can have any background you like. If you didn't want to create your own background, you could certainly use scrapbook papers or something of that nature in the background to do something similar. So thank you so much for joining in. Please check out the description box below to find the link to the live art journaling Facebook group, where you'll find all the other links for International Women's Day and lots of different techniques. Plus, I know both Jolene and Lucy have got amazing amounts of YouTube clips and so on there to help you out with junk journaling and all sorts. So it is a great group to be part of. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, bye for now.